Bastogne, December 22, 1944. White flags against a gray Ardennes sky. 4 German envoys pick their way up the snow-packed road to the American lines at Bastogne, the crossroads town encircled since 20 to 21 December 1944. In their hands, a typed ultimatum to the USA commander of the encircled town of Bastogne, warning of annihilation by heavy guns if he does not yield within 2 hours. The note is typed on an English machine. The umlauts are penciled in by hand. Inside a cold schoolhouse turned headquarters, Brig General Anthony C. McAuliffe, acting commander of the 101st Airborne Division, reads the pages, smiles, and lets the room exhale. Staff officers wait for phrasing. He tries a sentence, rejects it, and finally leaves the line exactly as it fell out of his mouth. One word. All caps. Nuts. The answer is typed, signed, and handed to Colonel Joseph Bud Harper, who walks it back to the waiting Germans and translates the meaning, plainly. The snow keeps falling. The guns keep testing the perimeter. But the geometry of the siege has shifted, because a single syllable just turned a demand into a promise. The next pages explain why this word held: logistics, roads, weather, and an armored column racing north to make it true. At 5:30 on December 16, 1944, the German offensive Walk dem Rhein opened along a 80-mile front in the Ardennes. Its operational logic was blunt: rupture the thin U.S. line, cross the Meuse within days, seize Antwerp, and split the Allied coalition. To do that with speed, the Germans needed armored march routes that didn't tangle in winter forest. That geography converged on Bastogne, a modest town where 7 hard surface roads and key lateral tracks met. If the Americans held Bastogne, U.S. Corps could countermarch and block Wid-Ening penetrations. If the Germans took it quickly, their armored corps might outrun Allied reserves and reach the Meuse. 7 roads, Meuse in 3 to 4 days under the plan, Antwerp as the prize. The sector in front of Bastogne fell to 5th Panzer Army under General Otto von Manschufel, with XLVII Panzer Corps, General Heinrich Freiherr von Luttwitz, driving on the town. Luttwitz's main tools were 2nd Panzer Division, General Meinrad von Lauchert, Panzer Lehr Division, General Fritz Bayerlein, and 26th Volksgrenadier Division, General Heinz Kokott, reinforced by corps-level artillery and engineers. The timetable demanded that at least one armored division break past Bastogne within 48 to 72 hours, or the window to the Meuse would close as U.S. reserves arrived. That clock, not ideology, explains the surrender note that would arrive later. Luttwitz needed the crossroads now, not after a siege. On the American side, the first response was speed over elegance. Before dawn on December 18th, 8 Corps began funneling every mobile element it could spare toward the road hub. The core of the defense became the 101st Airborne Division, acting commander Brig General Anthony C. McAuliffe, 3 parachute infantry regiments, 501st, 502nd, 506th PIR, the 327th Glider Infantry, Divisional Artillery, 321st, 377th PFAB, reinforced by 463rd PFAB, engineers and signals, backfilled by bits of corps artillery and services. Paper strengths varied by regiment. Divisional totals in and immediately around Bastogne Rand 10, 000, 11, 800 effectives once outlying detachments and attachments are counted. What made those numbers matter was how they were arranged. A 360-degree perimeter keyed to villages and ridgelines that blocked the 7 roads in every direction. Armor was thin but decisive. The 10th Armored Division sent its Combat Command B, CCB, forward under Colonel William L. Roberts, a mobile fire brigade broken into named task teams built around Sherman companies, armored infantry, and tank destroyers. Team Cherry, Lieutenant Colonel Henry T. Cherry, fought to the northeast around Longville, Noville. Team de Sobry, Lieutenant Colonel James O'Hara de Sobry, held Noville then Foy. Team O'Hara, Lieutenant Colonel Laprade/Major O'Hara, covered Wardin, Majoret to the southeast. The town also gained a specialist killer at the right hour. The 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion rolled in with M18 Hellcats on 20 to 21 December, adding high-velocity guns and fast, dash-and-shoot tactics to the close-in fight. Each team's mission was the same: trade space for time, wreck point columns, and fall back into the shrinking ring before being cut off. Weather wrote the next paragraph. Low cloud, freezing fog, and snow grounded most Allied air for 16 to 22 December. That meant no routine fighter bombers to break up columns, no easy aerial resupply, and no quick medevac. It also meant the Germans could push road columns up to American villages with fewer losses, so the perimeter had to work. The 101 Estes artillery solved much of that problem. Even before clear skies returned, McAuliffe's staff massed guns, fused forward observers, and used the town's corps artillery to multiply divisional fires. The rule became simple. Every road approach triggered pre-registered concentrations. Every German probe into a hamlet met defensive fires from 2 or 3 directions. Encirclement tightened between the 20th and the 21st of December when German units coming from north, 2nd Panzer, east, 26th VGD, and south/west, Panzerlehr, linked up in the woods and road cuts around the town. By nightfall the ring was real. Only snow-choked tracks and intermittent patrol paths led out. Inside, the American logistical picture sharpened into crisis math. Ammunition, divisional 105mm and 155mm stocks were conserved for pre-registered missions. Small arms resupply hinged on trucks threading shell-swept streets. Fuel, CCB's tanks were rationed for local counterthrusts only. Medical, aid stations overflowed. Plasma and whole blood were scarce. Surgeons worked in basements by flashlight and stove heat. Rations, reserve K and D units stretched. Hot meals were rare and dangerous to move. Personalities made the system work. McAuliffe's headquarters, G3 Colonel Harry Kinnard, Chief of Staff Colonel Ned Moore, Artillery CO Colonel Sherburne, and division trains, kept the perimeter elastic by moving companies and batteries at night to meet each day's pressure point. On the southeast road net, 327th GIR and attached engineers mined verges, blew culverts, and used bazooka teams to shred advance guards before tanks could deploy. On the northern approaches at Noville, Foy, the 506th PR and Team de Sobry bought hours by fighting from stone barns and churchyards, delaying actions that would later let the division shorten and straighten the line. Every move fit the same causal chain: delay on the spokes, hold the hub, by the days needed for relief to come up from the south. German pressure climbed with the same logic. Kokot's 26th VGD shifted battalions to pry open Marvy, Neff, and the Arlencourt sectors. Panzerlehr massed for a push from Bertone, Assenois. 2nd Panzer probed Orthouville, Champagne, while its main body angled west toward the Meuse. On German maps, Bastogne looked like a solvable equation. Bring more guns, stack more infantry, and force the Americans to choose between perimeter holes and ammunition starvation. That equation produced the paper that arrived in the snow on December 22nd, a threat of annihilation by heavy artillery if Bastogne did not surrender within 2 hours. Luttwitz's calculus was not bluster. It was schedule. But a schedule, like a siege, cuts both ways. Cold air slid south out of the ceiling on December 23rd. Allied airmen heard it first in weather briefings. Riflemen felt it in the sudden, clearer cold. If the ring could hold one more day, 9 Troop Carrier Command would begin to throw C-47 resupply and glider lifts at the town. If armor from 3rd Army could cut its way north, the siege would become a corridor. That is the hinge we turn on now: the German demand, the one-word answer, and the hours that followed. By 21 to 22 December 1944, the map around Bastogne had stopped behaving like countryside and started acting like a machine. Each spoke road into the town, Neufchâteau, Arlon, Habay-la-Neuve, La Roche, Houffalize, Marquet, Neufchâteau, was a pressure gauge, and each village on the rim became a valve the Germans tried to twist open. General Heinrich von Luttwitz, XLVII Panzer Corps, brought weight to the task. 2nd Panzer Division feeling west toward the Meuse, Panzerlehr Division levering south and southwest, and General Heinz Kokot's 26th Volksgrenadier Division shouldering much of the infantry grind east and southeast. Corps artillery, 105s, 150s, and Nebelwerfer, was pushed forward into woods and draws to pound the hub before each attack cycle. The timing was no mystery. The German plan still sought a Meuse crossing in 3 to 4 days. Every hour they spent wrestling a stubborn crossroads here was an hour the window to Antwerp shrank. Inside the ring, the American perimeter hardened into routine and risk in equal measure. The 101st Airborne Division kept its regiment spread on a 360-degree arc, 501st PR broadly east and southeast, 506th PR north and northeast, 502nd PR northwest and west, and the 327th Glider Infantry anchoring gaps and road junctions, while divisional and corps artillery massed fires by prearranged code words. The attached armor of 10th Armored Division CCB continued to fight as a mobile fire brigade. Thin Sherman companies and assault guns shuttled from barnyard to ridgeline to meet each crisis, then bounded back behind the infantry as ammunition and fuel permitted. The math was stark. By the evening of December 21st, the defenders in and immediately around Bastogne totaled roughly 10 to 12,000 effectives with guns. The Germans engaging the ring in successive shifts easily doubled that at peak pressure with additional artillery tubes for every attack window. The first formal test of will arrived in paper form. Late morning December 22, 1944, 4 German representatives under white flags came through American lines bearing a typewritten message addressed to the USA commander of the encircled town of Bastogne. The ultimatum gave 2 hours to surrender or face annihilation by heavy guns. Brig General Anthony C. McAuliffe, acting commander of the 101st, read it aloud in his Chile headquarters, considered flourishes, and finally sent back the single word that had slipped out when he first saw it: nuts. The reply, typed and signed, went back in Colonel Joseph Bud Harper's hands. When the German officers asked what that meant, Harper translated plainly. Whatever the enemy expected, they received a timetable of their own. The 2 hours would pass, the shelling would come, and the line would still be there. Shells did come. On 22 to 23 December, German batteries worked the town and its approaches while infantry pried at places like Marvy, Neff, Wardin, and Champs. The effect was felt first in the basements. Ammunition for 105mm and 155mm guns was rationed to pre-registered concentrations. Small arms resupply to the rim often meant trucks gunning through streets under harassing fire. Medical stations overflowed, plasma and morphine stretched, surgeons operated by lamps and pot-bellied stoves. Rations ran thin, D-bars and coffee substituted for meals. The 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion's M18 Hellcats and the infantry's bazooka teams became the close-in equalizers whenever panzers tried to nose into a hamlet, hit the lead tank hard, smoke the flanks, force dismounts into kill zones, and by the hour needed to roll a gun or a Sherman down a lane. Everything hinged on a ceiling. From 16 through December 22nd, low cloud and freezing fog had grounded most Allied air. That grounded 2 things at once: the fighter bombers that normally raked road columns, and the C-47 resupply that Bastogne now needed to live. The weather broke at last on December 23rd. To riflemen on the line, it was only a colder clarity in the air. To the staff in the schoolhouse, it was a green light. 9 Troop Carrier Command began throwing C-47 serials at the town, dropping bundles on panels marked by the defenders and, as conditions improved, bringing in gliders with medical teams and critical kit. The effect rippled instantly. 105mm and 155mm stacks thickened enough to resume the perimeter's doctrine, let them onto the spokes, then beat them with pre-registered cross-fires. Medical supplies reached basements where surgeons had been counting gauze by inches. For a town that had been living off what trucks could snatch between barrages, it felt like a lungful of air. The second hinge was steel coming from the south. On December 19th, even as the bulge widened, General George S. Patton had swung elements of 3rd Army North in a maneuver that Staff Ride still diagram, pivoting 90 degrees in winter to lift a siege. The spear point that mattered to Bastogne was Major General John S. Wood's 4th Armored Division under Major General Manton S. Eddy's 12 Corps, then committed to the relief under 3 Corps control. Its 37th Tank Battalion and 53rd Armored Infantry Battalion, among others, began forcing their way up from Arlon through villages with names like Martelange, Biggenville, Chaumont, and Assinois, cutting through blown bridges and anti-tank belts while fighting their own flanking battles against 26th VGD and Panzer Lehr. The distances on the map were short, 20 to 30 kilometers, but the time was measured in minefields, felled trees, and German guns pulled off the Bastogne ring to stall the relief. Those 2 lines, air from above and armor from below, were not independent. They reinforced each other by design. Airdrops stabilized artillery and small-arm stocks so the perimeter could keep fighting at the spokes. The perimeter's stubbornness kept German divisions pinned to the ring instead of massing along the Assinois road against 4th Armored. The German High Command, already struggling with fuel and snow-choked routes, faced an arithmetic that only got worse with each day Bastogne failed to fall. Artillery ammunition burned in bombardments that could not produce a breach. Infantry battalions bled themselves on villages whose names meant little outside a staff journal. Armor slated for the westward dash found itself swinging back to deal with a corridor that refused to die. By Christmas Eve, the town had a pulse again. Air had flown for 2 days. Gliders began to slide into fields and pastures with medics and surgeons, and the unmistakable rumble of a hard fight filtered up from the south, where 4th Armored was battering at the last belts before the ring. German attacks did not cease. Champs and Hemroll saw sharp, local armor infantry thrusts in the pre-dawn of December 25th, but the psychology had altered. The ultimatum on the 22nd had promised annihilation. The mathematics of the 23rd, 24th, and 25th suggested the opposite. The ring held. The sky worked. Something heavy was coming up the road. The decisive hours, the first clear resupply runs, the Christmas fighting on the rim, and the moment a Sherman from 37th Tank Battalion burst into Assiniboia and radioed that it was at the gates, belonged to the turning point of the story. That is where the one-word answer stops being a line on paper and becomes a line of tanks and trucks, headlights masked, grinding into the town at dusk. Bastone's center of gravity was a temperament as much as a map. Brig General Anthony C. McAuliffe, acting commander of the 101st Airborne Division, ran a cold headquarters with warm steadiness, short orders, no theater. His core team mattered. Colonel Harry W. O. Kinnard, G3, Operations, kept a running picture of the ring. Colonel Ned Moore, Chief of Staff, turned that picture into clean fragmentary orders. Colonel William L. Roberts, commanding 10th Armored Division CCB, synced the Mobile Fire Brigade with the paratroopers' fixed strongpoints. Colonel William L. Sherburne massed divisional and attached corps artillery so every spoke road triggered pre-plotted concentrations. 2 hard data points anchor that poise. The town had been encircled by 20 to 21 December 1944, and by the morning of December 22nd, the German Corps commander demanded surrender within 2 hours under threat of annihilation by heavy guns. McAuliffe's one-word reply, "Nuts," wasn't bravado, it was policy. Morale flowed outward from that tone into procedures that saved lives. Battalion CPs posted pre-written displacement orders so units could jump one village back at night without chaos if a sector bent. Division kept runner nets alive when radios went down under shelling, and companies rotated forward squads to thaw in school basements for 3-hour cycles whenever fire eased. Causality is clear. Calm command rhythm, predictable reliefs, fires, and countermove, a perimeter that didn't panic when pressure peaked. The symbolism completed the circuit. When Colonel Joseph Bud Harper carried the typed "nuts" back to the German envoys and explained it in plain language, the word traveled faster than any order. Hold the ground, the relief is coming. The ring worked because its parts were arranged to trade time for survivability. The 101st distributed its infantry to match terrain and approach roads. 502nd PIR northwest and west through Champs and the woods toward Bizery. 506th PIR north and northeast along Noville, Foy. 501st PIR east and southeast through Neff and Marvy. The 327th Glider Infantry tying gaps and protecting the southern road net toward Assiniboia and Arlon. Those placements weren't artistic, they were mathematical. Each village became a 2- or 3-direction kill box pre-registered by artillery, with bazooka teams and at mines layered to stop the first tank and force dismounts into small arms fire. Behind those fixed teeth moved 10th Armored Division CCB under Colonel Roberts, broken into named teams that locals learned by heart. Team Cherry fought northeast of town, Longville, Noville, to shatter point columns from 2nd Panzer. Team de Sobry held Noville/Foy, bleeding armor at the churchyard walls. Team O'Hara, Wardin, Majoret, parried thrusts from 26th Volksgrenadier Division and Panzerlehr. The arrival of the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion with M18 Hellcats on 20–21 December added fast, hard-hitting guns that could sprint between hamlets, fire, and relocate before German artillery registered. Data points that fix the logic. By December 21st, the defenders in and immediately around Bastogne totaled roughly 10 to 12,000 effectives with guns. German formations attacking the ring in shifts outnumbered them locally and brought additional artillery to each pulse. Cause and effect. Elastic strongpoints plus mobile armor/TD reserve. Attackers forced to deploy early, pre-registered artillery and short counterthrusts punished the deployment. That geometry turned every German attempt to drive through into a series of company-level fights at stone barns and crossroads. Exactly the friction the Meuse timetable could not afford. For 6 days the ceiling was the enemy. From 16 through December 22nd, low cloud and freezing fog mostly grounded Allied aircraft, which removed 2 tools at once: the fighter bombers that normally chopped up road columns and the C-47 lifts that Bastogne needed for ammunition, plasma, and radio batteries. The first good day, December 23, 1944, changed the arithmetic immediately. Marked panels and smoke on the snow pulled in serial after serial from 9 Troop Carrier Command. On that first clear day, roughly 250 to 260 C-47s dropped on the pocket. Published tallies for Day 1 run 334 tons of supplies, with more tonnage added across 24 to 26 December as weather permitted. Gliders began landing in fields and pastures with medical teams, whole blood, plasma, and critical kit. Each pallet had a compounding effect. 105 mm and 155 mm stocks thickened enough for the artillery plan to revert from crisis conservation to pre-registered fires by code word. Small arms and mortar belts reached companies that had been living off hand-carried loads. Basements turned operating rooms got plasma and morphine that had been down to inches and ampoules. Causality again is clean. Weather break, air resupply, artillery/mortar fires restored, spokes held with fewer infantry casualties, which in turn kept infantry in the line long enough for the 2nd Lifeline, 3rd Army's 4th Armored Division, to finish battering through the last roadblock south of Assinois on 25 to 26 December. The Germans felt the same sky in reverse. Every hour of clear weather forced XLVII Panzer Corps to spend artillery ammunition on counter-battery and town harassment without securing a breach. Every pallet that landed meant the next assault would meet full-weight barges and fresh at rockets instead of empty belts. The siege that looked algorithmic on the 22nd began to feel unsolvable by the 24th. Those three lenses, leadership and morale, perimeter geometry, and air-delivered stamina, lock into a single mechanism when the ultimatum expires. Next comes the confrontation itself and the race against the clock, the surrender demand at noon on the 22nd, the translation of nuts, the battered hours that followed, and the first clear sky drops that made the answer real. General Heinrich von Luttwitz, commanding XLVII Panzer Corps, had a clock and a map. The Wacht am Rhein scheme demanded armored momentum toward the Meuse within 3 to 4 days of the December 16th jump-off. The 7-road hub at Bastogne was either a springboard or a choke. His assault mix, 2nd Panzer Division, Panzer Lehr Division, and 26th Volksgrenadier Division, gave him tanks to break villages, infantry to hold gaps, and corps artillery, field guns plus Nebelwerfer, to suppress the hub before each push. By 20 to 21 December 1944, the ring closed, but at a cost in time. By the morning of December 22nd, he tried to buy the rest with paper. The ultimatum his envoys delivered, 2 hours to surrender under threat of annihilation, wasn't theater. It was an attempt to convert fires into capitulation and recover the timetable to the Meuse. Cause, effect, operational schedule, ultimatum as a time saver, refusal forces continued investment at Bastogne. Once nuts locked the door, Luttwitz had to keep 26th VGD grinding at the rim, Marvy Neff, while dragging parts of Panzer Lehr south and west and leaving 2nd Panzer too thin to screen its own western dash. The more tubes and battalions he pinned to the hub, the fewer he could mass against 4th Armored Division fighting up from Arlon. Bastogne, meant to be a speed bump, became a suction point, in operational terms, a fix. Encirclement turns into arithmetic fast. By December 21st, the garrison's effective strength in and immediately around Bastogne sat near 10 to 12,000 with guns. German formations could double local pressure in attack windows. Ammunition economies followed. 105 mm per 155 mm allotments cut to pre-registered fires only. Bazooka rounds prioritized for the first 2 tanks into any village. M18 Hellcat TDs husbanding AP for point shots. Fuel for 10th Armored CCB was rationed to local counter-thrusts, no long chases. Rations degraded to K/D bars and coffee. Radio batteries were a daily crisis. Most critical was medical. Aid stations overflowed by 22 to 23 December. Plasma, morphine, whole blood ran to inches and ampoules. The weather break on December 23rd inverted the curve. 9 Troop Carrier Command pushed in 250, 260 C-47s that first clear day with roughly 334 tons of bundles. Published day, 1 tallies, followed by additional drops 24 to 26 December. As skies improved, gliders brought surgical teams, plasma/whole blood, and specialized kit. Within 24 hours, divisional artillery could resume the perimeter's doctrine, code word barrages on road approaches, and surgeons in cellar ORs had supplies to keep men alive who would have died 2 days earlier. Cause, effect, air tonnage, restored fires and medicine, fewer holes in the rim, time for 4th Armored to break in. The same drops also sent a message through every platoon CP. There would be another day's ammunition and bandages. In siege math, that knowledge is combat power. A perimeter holds because men believe tomorrow exists. The nuts reply on December 22nd became more than a headline when it synchronized with 2 tangible promises, air above and armor below. McAuliffe's staff turned the word into routine, short reliefs from foxholes to cellar heat, runner nets when radios died, pre-plotted fires that arrived on the 2nd, and a steady flow of quick notes to regimental CPs that read like a metronome. On December 24th, The division circulated a Christmas message that acknowledged shelling and shortages, then pointed to the same fact every rifleman could see after the 23rd, aircraft overhead and bundles on the snow. The German side pressed hard to crack that belief. Night and dawn attacks at Champs, Hemrul, Marvy, and Neff tried to force micro-routes through hedgerows and barns. Pre-assault barges aimed to make units fear being forgotten. Instead, men saw C-47s and then gliders arrive. They heard that Third Army was fighting north. They watched the perimeter flex without panic as companies slid one village back at night and reoccupied stronger lines by morning. Two hard data points pinned the psychology to the clock. Clear skies resumed December 23rd, and the relief column Spearpoint, the 37th Tank Battalion, 4th Armored Division, would radio at dusk December 26th from Assinois that it had broken through. Cause, effect, one-word defiance, codified in procedures, reinforced by drops, validated by tanks at the gate. Morale isn't decoration here, it is the system's lubricant. When the German envoys carried back nuts, they carried a forecast the garrison then made true. Those angles complete the mechanism behind the moment. Next comes the turning point in two parts. 1. The ultimatum hours on December 22nd, delivery, the translation of nuts. Immediate German blows on the rim, and 2. 23 to 26 December, air resupply and strength, the Christmas fighting, and the 4th Armored break-in at Assinois near 1650, December 26th. Late morning, December 22nd, 1944. Snow scrapes sideways across the square in Bastogne as 4 German representatives, white flags up, are brought blindfolded through the lines to a schoolhouse that smells of coal and iodine. Their typed message is crisp, the tone impersonal. To the USA commander of the encircled town of Bastogne, you have 2 hours to surrender or face annihilation by heavy guns. The clock starts when they leave. Inside, Brig General Anthony C. McAuliffe reads the note once, smiles without warmth, and lets the room breathe. His staff, Colonel Ned Moore and Colonel Harry Kinnard, offer draft phrasing. McAuliffe keeps the word that fell out of his mouth the moment he saw the ultimatum. Nuts. It is typed, signed, and passed to Colonel Joseph Bud Harper to carry back under a white flag. In the lane beyond the checkpoint, the German officers, sent from XLVII Panzer Corps on General Heinrich von Luttwitz's authority, ask what this American word means. Harper translates it politely into something they will not mistake. The paperwork portion of the siege is over. Noon, 1400. The 2-hour window runs out with no movement in the American lines. That is the point. Company runners move along cellars and stairwells with the same message. Hold your fires unless you can see them, then shoot for keeps. Engineers recheck mines on the spokes. Artillery liaison officers phone through the code words that will call pre-registered concentrations on every road approach. In the town's makeshift hospitals, aid stations doubled as operating rooms. Surgeons lay out what remains of their plasma, morphine, and dressings. The men in the foxholes count their bazooka rounds and pass around coffee gone cold in the winter air. Afternoon. The bombardment starts. German 105s, 150s, and Nebelwerfer begin to work the grid squares around the hub, shifting fire in standard patterns. Marvy and Neff to the southeast, Wardin, Majoret, and the high ground toward Arlencourt, Foy, Noville, and the tree lanes around Bizery to the north. The first shells feel like punctuation, then the rhythm sets in and the whole town shakes to it. American counter-battery does not try to duel tube for tube, it obeys doctrine. Save 105 mm and 155 mm for the moment the infantry begins to show on a spoke, then fire by codeword and number. The gunners of division artillery, 321st and 377th Parachute Field Artillery with attached core pieces, wrap the road bends in arithmetic. Every German attempt to drive straight becomes a problem with 3 wrong answers. Southeast, Marvy, Neff. Elements of 26th Volksgrenadier Division feel for the seams with tanks from Panzer Lehr in support. The American 327th Glider Infantry sits in the barns and stone cottages with engineers and bazooka teams layered deep. The first German tank noses into Marvy proper and dies at street range. Infantry pours off the decks and meets registered 105s that cut lanes through the smoke. When the next wave tries to swing wide, M18 Hellcats from the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion sprint to a hedge, fire, and disappear, fast enough to keep German gunners guessing, hard enough to make the next tank commander think twice before he pushes the corner. By evening, the line is dented but where it was at noon. Ammunition is counted, not guessed. So are casualties. North, Foy, Noville, Champs. The 506th Parachute Infantry, the same regiment that had bled to hold Noville on the 19th, sits on frozen plow and among orchard trees, looking at fields that offer no cover to either side. Small German groups test the wire, throw down probes that look like more than they are, and call in harassing fire when they find nothing. Just before full dark, stronger elements edge toward Champs and Hemrul, looking to lever the line off the road net and open space for a night thrust. American observers walk 155mm rounds into the trees that shelter the forming-up points. The Germans stop, then try elsewhere. Each time they move, the paratroopers' code words bring the next pattern of steel. South and southwest, toward Assinois and the Arlone Road. Here, too, the enemy tries to test for panic. Short-armored pushes down lanes that are little more than tracks in the snow. The answer is method, not drama. 10th Armored Division's Combat Command B, under Colonel William L. Roberts, has kept its teams, Cherry, DeSobriere, O'Hara, intact despite losses and fuel rationing. You can hear them move by the way the town's sound changes. Tank engines at idle, then throttle, then the heavy clank that says a Sherman is taking a corner it doesn't like. The teams do not leave the perimeter. They rebalance it, counterpunching just far enough to break enemy momentum and then sliding back inside before the barrage follows them home. Dusk. The German envoy's 2 hours are long over. The bombardment has not produced a surrender flag. From the southeast, another push at Marvy rolls forward under the winter dark. American machine guns stay cold until the last barns on the edge of the village become silhouettes, then chatter short, precise bursts. A bazooka team gets a side shot into a Panzer IV at 10 paces and disappears into a stairwell before the second tank can slew a turret. When the German infantry piles into the streets to clear the houses, they run into interlocking fires from 2 companies whose platoon leaders have memorized the prearranged sectors like catechisms. Artillery flattens the road behind them, mortars pluck at the side alleys. The survivors slide back the way they came. Night, 2223 December. The town keeps breathing. Field kitchens try for a hot meal and are shelled off it. Aid stations are full, whole blood is gone. A surgeon marks a plasma bottle to track the hours it has been thawed and refrozen too many times. In the schoolhouse headquarters, McAuliffe's staff trades coffee for clean overlays. Runner nets carry updates to regiments when radios stay stubbornly dead under the jamming of rubble and winter. The artillery fire plan for the next day assumes the same pattern, spokes first, then the hubs that form in the trees. Hard numbers fix the night's verdict. Bastogne has been encircled since 20 to 21 December. The ultimatum on the 22nd failed to move a company. The ring is still where the paratroopers drew it. And yet the geometry shifts by inches, because the sky begins to thin. A hint of stars. A colder air. Weather talks to men in foxholes long before it talks to air staff. But in the headquarters of 9 Troop Carrier Command, the forecast for December 23rd has already started to turn from a wish into a plan. If the ceiling lifts and the wind holds, the first C-47 serials will come. If the serials come, the artillery plan grows teeth again. If the plan grows teeth, the line can be held for another day, until someone heavy thunders up the Assinois Road and calls on the division command net from the south. The word sent in the snow at noon has done its work. Now the siege becomes a race against a weather chart and a set of roadblocks. The next part of the turning point belongs to the sky and to the tanks. 23 to 26 December, the first full-strength resupply drops, the Christmas fighting on the rim, and the 4th Armored Division spearhead forcing its way through to the gate at dusk December 26. December 23rd, morning. The ceiling lifts like a stage curtain, ragged, then suddenly high and hard blue. It is the one change the town can feel at once. The first C-47 serials from 9 Troop Carrier Command come on heading, throttle steady, doors yawning over panel-marked drop zones on the snow. Parachutes burst open, olive, white, and tan, then swing hard in the winter wind. Crews on the ground sprint across the fields, dragging canvas off ice with mittened hands. By nightfall, roughly 250 to 260 transports have pushed bundles through the sky, about 300-plus tons in the first big lift, with more tonnage promised if weather holds. Boxes crack, the day's arithmetic changes. 105mm and 155mm stacks are back. Mortar rounds and .30/.50 belts are back, radio batteries are back, and in a few of the gliders that bump to a halt in stubbled fields, surgeons and plasma step out into the cold. Cause and effect is immediate and local. Forward observers key their pre-registered code words without the old fear of running dry. When German infantry shapes begin forming in edgewoods, the fire missions arrive in sequence patterns instead of thin salvos. When a tank noses through a hedge in Marvy or Neff, a bazooka team no longer counts the last 2 rockets. They fire and move because more will come tomorrow. In the schoolhouse HQ, the staff blocks out the next 24 hours as if the siege were simply weather-dependent work. If skies stay open on the 24th, more serials. If the 25th clears, gliders again. December 24th. The program continues. More C-47s. More bundles. More gliders clawing at the fields, their noses digging into snow and mud, medics spilling out with kit bags and whole blood. But the enemy reads the sky, too. XLVII Panzer Corps pushes fresh assaults against the rim to force a break before the relief can close. The pressure points are familiar now. Marvy and Neff to the southeast, Champs, Hemrul to the north and northwest, Assinoy's Road nets to the south. The town's response is as methodical as the drops. Divisional artillery waits for the silhouettes, then flips the switch on converged fires from 3 directions. M18 Hellcats of the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion lope between hedgerows, shoot, scoot. 10th Armored CCB shifts a Sherman platoon at a time, counterpunching to ruin the German deployment and then fading back inside the ring before the inevitable barrage. Night, 2425 December. Air quiet. Snow breathing. The German staff picks Champs and Hemrul for the pre-dawn shove. In the black hour before Christmas, armor and infantry feel forward under a low, bruised sky. On the ground, the 502nd Parachute Infantry has rehearsed this move in its head for days. Trip flares, machine gun cones, bazooka teams set to shoot at 10 to 20 paces, and codeword artillery to smash the road behind any tank that slips into a village. The fight unspools in hard, short bursts, panzers edged into lanes and set alight, German squads broken up in orchards by He and airburst, counter-thrusts by Shermans timed to the second so they meet dismounts with canister and back out before the counter-battery finds them. By mid-morning December 25th, the line has bent and snapped back. The town's Christmas consists of a commander's note, strong coffee, and the sight of C-47s again when the cloud thins just enough. December 25th, midday afternoon. South of the ring, the relief column is fighting a different war with the same purpose. 3rd Army's 4th Armored Division, task organized under 3 Corps for the drive, has been gnawing at roadblocks since 19 to 21 December. Blown bridges at Martelange, belts of felled timber and mines at Bougainville and Chaumont, and ambush fire from 26th Volksgrenadier Division and dribbled detachments from Panzerlehr. The tip of the spear is the 37th Tank Battalion, with infantry from the 53rd Armored Infantry Battalion laced through the column. They keep moving because the schedule isn't theirs. It's the schedule of a pocket that must be opened before its calculus collapses. The distances look short on a map, tens of kilometers, but each kilometer has to be bought twice, once from the Germans and once from the Ardennes in winter. December 26th, morning. The last miles hinge on a village, Assinoy's, south-southwest of Bastogne. The German staff has done exactly what the Americans feared, slung bunched guns and obstacles across the road into a killing field. The 37th Tank Battalion mass starts anyway. Platoons fan left and right of the road, infantry riding or trotting alongside, artillery walking smoke and he in measured steps. A tank commander calls a halt, then a go, a bridge that should not hold, holds, engineers yank a snag of wire off a culvert and wave a Sherman through, a roadblock that should have been manned, isn't, because its company got pulled east last night to feed one more attack at Marvy. Hours disappear into hedges and draws. The column inches, then surges. December 26th, 16:45, 16:50. The voice on the radio is impossibly calm for what it is saying. Cobra King, a Sherman of C Company, 37th Tank Battalion, is through Assinoy's and into the outer streets, its commander 1st Lieutenant Charles Bogus scanning for mines and rockets while the tank's .50 chatters short, warning bursts at windows. A moment later, the words every net has been tuned to catch, contact. And then the specific version that belongs to Bastogne, contact with the 101st. On the division command frequency in the town, the reply arrives with a flood of overlapping voices. Men in foxholes hear it because sound travels oddly in snow. Men in cellars hear it because some messages bind whole buildings. The siege doesn't end at that second. The corridor is a slit that must be held and widened, but the geometry of the campaign does. The ring is cut. Dusk, December 26th. The first jeeps come through under blackout hoods, then more tanks, then half-tracks with men hunched under canvas. The corridor is not safe. German guns will rake it and counterattacks will try to pinch it shut over the next 24 to 48 hours, but the law of the problem has changed. Air from above and armor from below have connected. Within hours, trucks with ammunition and rations are inside the town. Within a day, ambulances will begin to thread out with the worst of the wounded. Within 2 days, the relief will be a lane, not a thread. Causality, written large. The ultimatum on December 22nd failed to buy German time. The weather break on the 23rd purchased American time by the ton. The Christmas attacks at Champs/Hemroll bled German infantry for little ground, and the 37th Tank Battalion's push through Assinois at 16:50 on December 26th turned a siege into a corridor. The one-word reply, nuts, did not win the battle by itself. It chained morale, procedures, endurance long enough for airlift and armor to meet on a road where the map said they must. Night settles cold over the Ardennes. The town is still under shell fire, the roads are still murderous, but the men in the basements work with new math. Tomorrow has arrived on tracks. That changes everything that follows: casualty evacuation, ammunition discipline, German tasking, the tempo at the Meuse, and the way January will look on both sides of the front. Nightfall, December 26, 1944. The first blackout columns snake into Bastogne through Assinois. Tanks, half-tracks, and trucks stacked with .30/.50 belts, 60/81 mm mortar rounds, 105/155 mm shells, rations, and radio batteries. The siege has become a corridor, narrow and violent, but real. Within hours, priority runs push ammunition in and begin pulling the worst cases out, litter after litter from cellar aid stations where surgeons had been working by lamp and stove heat. The corridor must be held and widened. Through 27 to 28 December, 4th Armored Division, spearheaded by 37th Tank Battalion with the 53rd Armored Infantry, fights a rolling defense on the road net south and southwest of the town, beating back attempts by 26th Volksgrenadier Division and detachments of Panzer Lehr to pinch the gap shut. The pattern is method. Shermans and TDs anchor at hedges and culverts while artillery walks smoke and he in pre-registered fans. Armored infantry clears tree lines and barns with grenades and short, savage firefights. Each day the lane grows by hamlet and hedgerow, until traffic control points, MPs in white helmets with batons, can wave two-way flow without stopping the guns. Air keeps paying in. After the first full clear day, December 23rd, about 250 plus C-47S, 300 plus tons dropped. Additional serials on 24 to 26 December and glider landings bring the items that change casualty math. Whole blood, plasma, sulfa, anesthetics, surgical instruments, splints, and more blankets than anyone thought would matter, until they did. Artillery tables, too, flip from conservation to codeword barges by the book. Every German probe that forms on a spoke road now draws converged 105S/155S. Infantry assaults that previously slipped into villages are forced to deploy early and die in open fields pocked with shell holes. The casualty ledger crystallizes as reporting catches up. Across the Bastogne fight, through early January tallies for the division, the 101st Airborne Division records losses on the order of hundreds killed, is almost equal to 340 plus, over 1,600 wounded, and hundreds missing tied to the most violent days on the rim, numbers that track with regimental lists and hospital logs compiled once evacuation becomes routine. On the German side, battalion reports from 26th VGD and after-action notes from Panzer Lehr register severe attrition in company leadership and assault platoons thrown again and again at Marvy, Neff, Champs, Hemroll, and the Assinois approaches, with tank losses noted in platoon blocks rather than single vehicles. The exact totals vary across diaries. The direction does not. The infantry that was supposed to pry open the hub is bleeding out on the spokes. The operational picture tilts the same way. While 2nd Panzer Division had lunged far to the west and reached the Celles area near the Meuse on December 24th, its forward elements are cut off and forced back as Allied countermoves stiffen, fuel starvation and air attack erode momentum. The decision to keep XLVII Panzer Corps pounding at Bastogne through Christmas and into 26 to 27 December forces an ugly trade. The very divisions meant to protect the dash to the river are now fixed around a crossroads that refuses to fall. Each German battalion that remains outside Bastogne to hammer the corridor is a battalion that cannot thicken the Meuse screen. Each artillery battery that spends another day on town harassment is a battery that cannot cover a withdrawal when the spearheads begin to ebb. Inside the town, administration replaces improvisation. Traffic nets route outgoing ambulances south under blackout and back in with high-priority ammunition. Ordnance teams sort captured German 7.5 cm and 8.8 cm rounds and separate anything that can be repurposed. QM details finally push hot soup and coffee to forward CPs now that roads exist to carry them. Engineers lift and relay mines to shape likely German lanes of approach away from the corridor. Signal sections replace field-expedient battery lash-ups with fresh sets off the trucks. The place looks less like a town under siege and more like a forward operating depot under intermittent shell fire. Recognition follows function. Word comes down that the 101st Airborne Division will be cited for its stand, its presidential unit citation recommendation framed not as a defense of prestige but of a logistics fact, a hub whose 7 roads kept the 5th Panzer Army's geometry from ever quite working. The division's men, for their part, mark the relief more pragmatically. A paratrooper who could not be evacuated on the 24th leaves on the 27th. A gun section that counted fuses and propellant charges like coins on the 22nd now draws fresh stacks. A company that fought Marvy twice in the same night now rotates to a cellar for 3 hot hours before going out again. Cause and effect, summarized. The ultimatum, December 22nd, failed. The air bridge, from December 23rd, restored artillery and medicine. The armored break-in, 16:50, December 26th, created a corridor, and the corridor enabled evacuation, resupply, and rotation at a tempo that the attacking corps could no longer match. The siege is over. The battle for the Ardennes is not. What Baston's survival now forces on the map, German withdrawals from the Meuse axis, Third Army's drive north and east, and the winter grind into January, is the second half of the consequence. The corridor into Bastogne did more than feed a town. It rewired the campaign. The bulge had been built on a timetable, Meuse in 3 to 4 days, bridgeheads to screen Antwerp, and Allied armies split along their coalition seam. Baston's survival forced the schedule into retreat. West of the pocket, 24 to 27 December. The farthest German lunge, 2nd Panzer Division at Celles near the Meuse on December 24th, was cut off and battered back by a tightening Allied vice, with U.S. 2nd Armored Division striking from the south and British elements stiffening river crossings to the north. Fuel-starved spearheads that should have been rolling to bridges instead fought to survive on local roads. Each day Bastogne tied down XLVII Panzer Corps units that might have screened this withdrawal. Each day the Meuse crossings looked less like gates and more like walls. At the hub, 27 to 31 December. The new law of Bastogne was throughput. 4th Armored Division kept the Assinois lane open under artillery harassment and local counterattacks, widened it village by village, and pushed patrols outward while the 101st Airborne straightened and shortened its arc traffic control points, choreographed an almost continuous loop, ammunition and rations in, wounded out. The air bridge stayed opportunistic, bundles and occasional gliders when weather allowed, now augmenting the road rather than replacing it. For the Germans, the arithmetic worsened. Each battalion pinned here to hammer the hub was one less to secure an orderly pullback from the salient's western lip. The larger map rolls forward. On January 3, 1945, the Allies opened a coordinated counteroffensive to compress the bulge from north and south. German orders recognized the slope. By the first week of January, formations that had hoped to mask a Meuse lodgment were instead extricating themselves under winter skies, with artillery ammunition and fuel burned at siege rates for little territorial gain. Bastogne had been the hinge. Deny the road hub, the drive bends outward. Hold it, the drive folds in on itself. The hub held. Human logistics caught up with strategy. With evacuation now routine, divisional surgeons processed hundreds of cases that would have been mortal on the 22nd. Frostbite turned around, infected wounds debrided, fractures set properly with glider-borne splints and traction. Artillery fire plans reverted to doctrine rather than improvisation. Engineers shifted from emergency mining to route maintenance and bridge repairs to sustain the column's flow. Signals finally lifted the last field-expedient lash-ups and restored clean nets across the division and the corridor. A garrison that had lived by foxhole clocks returned to a staff timetable that could breathe. Recognition followed function. The 101st Airborne Division's stand at Bastogne became the first great U.S. unit citation of the winter, less for rhetoric than for the measurable fact of a road hub kept alive under encirclement. Attached arms that made the math work, 10th Armored Division CCB, 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion, Corps Artillery, engineers, and medical detachments delivered by glider, entered the same ledger in unit histories and citations. In the German record, the tale reads from the other end: formations that never quite massed, XLVII Panzer Corps pinned to a fight its timetable could not afford, 26th Volksgrenadier ground down on villages that meant little outside this map. Strategic consequence in one line: Bastogne turned Walk am Rhein from a race to a salvage operation. The Meuse was never crossed in strength, Antwerp was never threatened, the Bulge became a salient to be evacuated under pressure. What was bought in a single town, days, not miles, broke the plan that depended on hours. The word in the snow on December 22nd made a promise. 4th Armored's headlights at dusk on December 26th kept it. The January grind wrote it into the campaign's end. The cold doesn't lift. The roads are still a misery. But the pressure has changed direction, and every man in the pocket can feel it in the way trucks arrive, in the way artillery answers, in the way wounded leave without waiting for the sky. That is the sum of Bastogne, a crossroads turned into a verdict. Snow dull sound, but not intention. In the winter ring around Bastogne, a siege that began as a timetable ended as a lesson in cause and effect. The ultimatum on December 22nd tried to buy hours with paper. The answer, nuts. Spent them instead. That single word worked only because a system stood behind it. Perimeter discipline, pre-registered fires, runner nets when radios failed, engineers shaping lanes, and a mobile fire brigade that counterpunched without wasting fuel or men. When the ceiling broke on the 23rd, the sky joined the plan. Pallets floated down and turned basements back into operating rooms, code words back into barges, and foxholes back into positions that could be held without guessing the last round. On Christmas, the rim bent and snapped back, and at dusk on the 26th, a Sherman called "Contact" at Assinois, proving that defiance had been logistics in disguise. The corridor that followed did not silence the guns. It changed their meaning. Ammunition in, wounded out, the arithmetic of survival, repeated until the attack bled time it did not have. Seen from higher up, the geometry is plainer. A road hub that should have been a stepping stone became a fix. Divisions meant for the Meuse fought villages with names that don't travel. A campaign that promised days to Antwerp discovered it could not afford one town's refusal. That is the shape of modern war when it is fought as a system. Morale is not a speech, it is a schedule that holds. Leadership is not a gesture, it is the calm that keeps procedures running when maps tear. Airlift is not romance, it is tonnage arriving on time. Armor is not thunder, it is a clock that finally reaches the gate. In the schoolhouse where the reply was typed, the room must have felt smaller after the tanks came in. Steam rose from wet field jackets, boots thumped upstairs, somebody laughed too loudly and stopped. Out on the roads, MPs waved columns through with mittened hands. In the cellars, surgeons cut and stitched by good light for the first time in days. The town did not celebrate. It exhaled, then went back to work. Years later, the word survives because it stood for a chain that held: refusal, routine, resupply, relief. Snow still falls on Bastogne. The crossroads is quiet. But the map of that winter keeps the verdict. Sometimes the shortest answer is the strongest plan.